experience that I had in North Carolina about 10 years ago when I was involved with an Innocence Project in North Carolina, and also teaching at journalism at the University of North Carolina. And we picked up a case that had been worked through by some students at Duke Law School. And my students were intrigued with it, so they went forward with it, and they went down to a small town in North Carolina near Charlotte, and they asked for the police records on a man who had been convicted of 4 counts of child abuse and sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms. He'd at that point been in prison for 10 years. He was 29 at the time he was arrested. Strapping, ebony black man with an IQ of 72. As you can imagine, he wasn't very effective in defending himself at all in the court proceeding. The police initially couldn't find the records, but we got to, the students went to the investigative officer. He found the records, gave them the records. They were looking through them, and at the bottom of the big box were some documents. This case had come about because a teacher in the elementary school had been a counselor in elementary school, had been talking to a student who was having trouble. And she said to him, "Is someone bothering you?" And so he told the story of being abused. And then he said, "Well, has this happened to any of your friends?" And he said yes, and he named a couple others. And so she wound up talking to 10 kids, all of whom said they had been abused. Police were called in at that point. They brought the kids in, they had a lineup. Most of the kids identified this man who was eventually tried and convicted. He had actually moved into the neighborhood about a week and a half or 2 weeks before these incidents started to happen, because his cousin was a young woman who had a child who was 3 years old and retarded, and she was about to have another child out of wedlock. And he said, "I'll come and take care of the child for you, and I will help you until you can get back on your feet." So he was new to the neighborhood. He had been seen by all these kids. Well, when we looked at the records, 10 pieces of paper, which were the original interviews of the counselor with the students, 6 of the students said they were abused by a white man. 2 said they were abused by a light-skinned Negro. 2 made no racial identification of any kind whatsoever. On the basis of the police identification which followed and the ID process that the kids were put through, they all identified this one man. You have to wonder what happened in this so-called lineup that the police had. But in any event, the man had been in jail for 10 years. But because we were able to get those records and look at them and then start raising questions because of it, we were ultimately able to get the man out of prison. Another example, I think, of the importance of access to public records. And I think the basic point I would like to make is that we have a participatory democracy. And participatory is the key word. We have to be able to participate in our government, and that means we have to have information to do it. We have to know what's going on. And so that's kind of what has driven me. The federal government passed the Freedom of Information Act in 1967, and Lyndon Johnson signed it symbolically on July 4th. A friend of mine who has filed FOIL requests and filed a few FOIL lawsuits refers to it as a law that, quote, increases the openness of government over what it would be without the law, but still keeps many parts of government secret. Let me give you an example of what this can mean. On May 18, 1994, the head of the State Department Intelligence Unit wrote a report on genocide in Rwanda. Until then, the United States had not used the term genocide in reference to what was happening in Rwanda. But 3 days later, as a result of the memo, it started talking about genocide publicly. An unredacted version of that memo was released to a private organization, the National Security Archive, in 2001 in response to a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act request. And they posted it on their website. Then, I suppose it had been taken down from their website then or archived someplace, but in 2003, someone else came along and asked for the same document. In 2005, someone else did. In 2007, another request. And in 2012, another request. In each of those cases, a different redacted version of the same document was released by the agency, even though it had once released the entire document. 5 requests, 5 totally different responses under FOIA. A veteran, a Washington reporter, once told me that he has filed thousands of FOIA requests. And what he would do when he wanted really to get some information, he thought there might be something there and he might have some problems with it, he would ask a number of his colleagues to also file FOIA requests for the same document. Now, sometimes one of them would get the document and the others wouldn't, or it would be delayed, or they'd get some changes. What happened more frequently was that each would get back a redacted version, but with different redactions. And when they put all the documents together, they usually had 90 or 95% of the entire document. Then he could go ahead and write his story. A brilliant solution to
So, Peter, that was outstanding and depressing. Where's the sanction?
Where's what?
Where's the punishment? Where, other than shaming, when people play these games, declare high fees, slow roll these requests, withhold these documents on bogus grounds, and then eventually that gives way, what price do they pay? Who holds them accountable?
That's an extremely good question, and it's one that has even a more discouraging answer, I think. You know, I look at what we've done in Florida and what we've accomplished there. We've got we've got some very, very good laws, and obviously we've got a very strong constitutional provision on open government. There have been a handful of prosecutions for either open records abuse or public meetings abuse over the years. Since 1967, the laws first went in. I can literally count them on one hand, and most of them are fairly minor. I think it was the late 90s before the first public official actually went to jail for about 30 days for withholding public records. The most effective sanctions are 2 things. Number one, if you sue, and this is true at both the federal level and in most of the states, if you sue for public records and you win, you can collect attorney's fees. So you can get reimbursed for whatever you had to spend to get that information. And then the other is that if a council or a school board or other agency violates the open meetings law, that action, any action they take at that meeting can be invalidated. And there was one case recently where a zoning code was adopted at a private session, and the court threw it out. And they, in effect, had to go back and go through the whole public hearing process and go through it again and re-adopt the code, whatever changes. But essentially saying, you know, the public has a right to participate in that process, to be heard, and to go forward with it.